In the previous demo, Bob created this virtual machine, Bob's VM-1, but when Bob created that virtual machine, he did not select the allow HTTP traffic firewall rule, and that's because we didn't give Bob the necessary permissions to create a firewall rule, right? Now if Bob creates a new virtual machine, and let's say that he's going to keep the default name and everything else, but this time Bob is going to click allow HTTP traffic, right, to create a firewall rule. And if I click create, then this instance creation will fail, and that's because user Bob does not have permissions to create a firewall rule or to update the network policy and other things, right? Now the VM creation failed, and as you can see, it was automatically removed from the VM list here, right? And if I go to my notification bar here, then it will clearly say that you don't have the required compute.networks.update policy permission for this project to create an instance. That's because you were checking that allow HTTP rule. So we need to fix it. But user Bob cannot fix this permission issue. So what he has to do is he has to contact the project owner. In this case, it's GCP Yoda, and then complaint about it, right? So let's log in as GCP Yoda, and then let's fix this permission. Okay, we are logged in as user gcpyoda@gmail.com, and GCP Yoda, as we know, is the project owner. So let's go to start menu and then click on our IAM and admin section. And in here we can see that the user gcpminion@gmail.com, who's user Bob, has only the compute instance admin permission, right? And we need user Bob only to create the firewall rule. We do not want to give user Bob permissions to delete firewall rule or do any other damages, right? So let's see what we can do about this. I'm just going to click the drop down box, and then I'm going to click manage roles, because there is just too many roles and not every one of them is searchable here. So that's why I just click manage roles, and then here I'm going to filter by firewall. And from here you have different roles that has this firewall permission, right? I'm interested in compute security admin because this particular role has that compute firewalls.create permission, which will allow you to create a firewall rule. But note that it also has the compute firewalls delete, which we do not want user Bob to have, right? And then there are other roles too. For example, project owner Yoda knows that he wants these three permissions to give to user Bob so that he can successfully create only the firewall rule but not do anything else like delete it or modify it, right? So let's proceed and create a role here, and I'm going to give it a name. Let's just say Bob, not Bib, Bob HTTP rule allow. Description created on stuff, and I'm just going to say created by GCP Yoda. Again, if anybody is taking over this account, that will be easy to recognize. Customer role ID, I'll leave it as it is. It is unique and it's automatically generated. And then the role alpha stage, right? You do have to note that there are different stages here, and this is the custom role is in beta state, which means Google is actually tested its functionality, and from a feature perspective it's ready to release, but still not covered by SLA. That's because there could be any outstanding issues that they are not aware of. So that's why they released it in beta. But I feel that the customer role is pretty important because there are so many use cases for it, and that's why we are going through this demo. Okay, let's just click add permissions, and then let's say networks. And in here I know I need compute networks update and update policy, because whenever you create a VM from Bob's screen, the notification bar here, we did see that it was actually asking for, hey, I don't have permission for compute networks update policy. So if you give this particular permission and then add permission and then you add Bob to this role, then the next error it will throw is, hey, I don't have compute network update. And then if you do this, then it will say, hey, I don't have firewalls create problem. So I have iterated all through these stages, so I'm just sharing this with you so that it's easy for you. You can replicate it on your own time. Now let's say firewall, because I want firewalls create permission, add permission. Now note that we have all these three permissions, right? and those are the 3 permission that GCP Yoda knows that he needs to give to Bob so that he can create just the firewall rule, right? So that's done, and then I'm going to create it, and the creation is just fairly fast, and that's done. Bob allow HTTP rule. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to IAM section again, and then here I'm going to choose that role, right? So manage roles, or in fact custom role, Bob HTTP allow, and save. Right, so now Bob, who uses this gcpminion@gmail.com, has permission to compute instance admin, and then he can also create firewall rule. Note that I've given the name as Bob HTTP rule allow, right? But he can create like particular port as well, for example SSH port or RDP port or MSSQL, MySQL port, those kind of things, but I'm just creating it for ease of identification here. And so that's done from owner's perspective, right? This is all done and Bob is good to go. So let's switch to Bob's screen. Okay, I'm back in Bob's screen. Just to confirm it, Bob sysadmin gcpminion@gmail.com. Now let's create an instance, but this time let's create an instance with the firewall rule. I'm just going to give it a name, Bob HTTP server, and I'm going to leave the rest all default, and let's select allow HTTP traffic and click create. And that VM is getting created. If I click the notification, it says create instance, and the VM creation is done. And you can see here, if I click the Bob HTTP server, you can see that the firewall rule is there, hello HTTP traffic, right? Now here is another question for you. Since we have given Bob permission to create the firewall rule, do you think he can create the firewall rule from his portal here, right? So let's go try it. We have to go to start menu, and then we have to go to our VPC network and firewall rules, and this is where all the firewall rules are located. And in here you see that default allow HTTP is there, but note that Bob still doesn't have permission to create a firewall rule from the portal, which is this web console, right? It clearly says you don't have permission to create a firewall rule. Now here is a question for you. Is there a way for Bob to create a firewall rule? If you think that there is a way, then you're absolutely right, and that's because those permissions and those roles are given for the API access, which means we can actually use the gcloud command line utility or write our own API to create firewall rule, right? So I'm still in Bob, as you know, and then I'm going to activate the Google Cloud Shell just to demonstrate that particular idea. So let's wait for the Google Cloud Shell to establish its connection. That started. So in here, I'm just going to type the command gcloud compute firewall rules create, and let's say Bob's test rule, and then let's allow TCP port 8989, so that way we can really identify that, you know, that particular rule gets created. In here we do not definitely have port 8989. Okay, gcloud compute firewall rules create Bob test rule dash I missed a dash. You need to pass 2 dashes there, and that's done, right? So it's creating a firewall rule. Okay, as you can see, the firewall rule is created, and the default is network, and the direction is ingress, priority is 1000. If I click refresh, you can see that port TCP 8989 is actually created there, right? But I definitely don't have permission to delete the rules, which is what we want, right? So that's the use of custom role. Now that concludes our custom role demo. Thank you for listening. Now let's move on to our next demo, which is IAM policy hierarchy.